Welcome to the Intrinsically Ordered podcast with our special guest of the day, Evelyn from Leave, Laugh, Love. And today we're going to be having a little bit more of an emotional conversation on how to leave Catholicism. Some practical steps for how do you navigate transitioning out while maintaining some semblance of a normal, happy life, navigating through that tough period. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
For people that aren't familiar with your story, could you give us a few sentence summary of why would you be somebody who would be qualified to talk about leaving Catholicism?
All right. So I was Sunflower Catholic back in the day, if anyone knows me from that era. I was a Catholic influencer for honestly, I think 4-ish years. And I had completely built my life around that, career around that. I went on to attend Franciscan, which we talked about in our other video, so go check that one out. We talked about Newman Guide schools, but I went on to attend Franciscan to get a degree in theology and catechetics, which I didn't get because I got kicked out for being gay. Kicked out / politely
forced off the plank,
encouraged to leave. So yeah, that happened and my life kind of crumbled, but we're doing great now.
Yes.
And I love that Veronica and I started our podcast, Leave Off Love, because we had the entire purpose of starting it was that we had no resources that were specific to the type of Catholicism we'd left when we were leaving. And so I love that we're able to be a resource and that you're able to be a resource and that we're just kind of building up more specific resources for this, because when I was leaving, I was listening to ex-Mormon podcasts. I was listening to ex-evangelical podcasts, and they were helpful on some level, but it's nice to have a more specific experience. Yeah.
For people that are hitting this for the first time on my own show, my background is I was a zealous young teenager in the traditional Catholic movement, all in daily mass, daily rosary, all of that jazz. Wanted to become a traditional Carmelite monk. That was my life's goal. And then deconstructed 2 years ago. So today we're going to be kind of going through, and if you're listening and you're somebody who's considering leaving, maybe knowing what leaving will look like.
Yeah.
I heard a quote out there, and I think it was about bankruptcy, where you go bankrupt slowly and then all at once.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same way with faith, where before I left, those few months beforehand, I knew kind of the inevitable. I knew that I was questioning, but also in that religious context, you're not allowed to bring up doubts because doubt itself is a sin. And so you're fighting against yourself. I'm not having doubts, but deep down you're is this the absolute truth? Is this the only way to live? Do I have to follow every single rule to a T? It's a hard position to be in, having to be dishonest with yourself, but also honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And into your earlier point on this type of Catholicism, tell people a little bit about what it's like to be part of this traditional or conservative Catholic movement as opposed to mainstream Catholics.
Yeah. So the term I like to use just to I guess kind of explain it in a more universally understandable way, as I call it Fundamentalist Catholicism, because it's not the same thing as your grandma who goes to mass every Sunday at her local Novus Ordo parish. Yes. This is not me shitting on the Novus Ordo, because Kate and I honestly are even in were in different corners of this world. You were more in the hyper traditionalist and I was on the charismatic side. So I attended the Novus Ordo for the most part. I did, I dabbled in the Latin mass, but I did attend your regular English priest facing the audience, holding hands during the Our Father parish. But it is just so much more intense in the belief, and in the charismatic world there's also just this level of emotional spiritual manipulation that I think is pretty unique to that corner of it, where it's these heavily manufactured emotional moments during praise and worship and things like that. But it's very involved. It takes over your entire life. It becomes very insular and very difficult to leave, and it starts to resemble a cult.
Yeah, I remember after our priest got sent to federal prison didn't say that he was innocent, but everybody assumed he was innocent because he was so holy, and then fundraise 150 grand for him. Like, that's when I was like, maybe this is a cult where our leader's in prison, but we still support him. I feel like I've watched a Netflix show or two about this, and not to say, and there's other content out there on why you might want to leave or reasons, and in this video we're not going through like, and here's 10 reasons to doubt. So if you're not doubting, this episode might not be for you, but who we want to talk to are people that are like, maybe I'm starting to question.
Yeah.
So I think the ironic thing in these faith communities is that there is no room for faith. All there is just knowledge. We know that this will send you to hell. We know that this is the only way to do it. We know God told you this, and we know God told you that. And we know that God condemned this, and there's no faith.
Yeah.
And so I think the first step in somebody's doubting is to be like, maybe this thing's more complex or more nuanced than I thought.
And I think like that was kind of the road that I went down, and I'm probably going to reference my friend Veronica's experience a lot because we went through that. Like, we have our podcast together, but we also like went through this like in parallel. Like the summer that like it kind of started to go downhill for both of us. Like, we were living together over the summer and like just like incessantly chatting about this. And I do think like that is like, if you have someone in your life who's like going through it in real time, like that's the only way I made it through.
Yeah.
Like, and so hopefully like, you know, it could be an internet version of that for you. But, what was my point?
Well, I remember the first time that I had a really serious doubt. I was driving through Las Vegas, and for the longest time, I knew that being in a gay relationship would be the worst thing ever, would send me to hell.
Yeah.
And I remember for the first time driving and like, in my head said, God, if you want me to be in a relationship with a man, I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah.
And for the first time I was like, shit, like I said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't say it verbally, but I said it in my head without like doubting. I was like, And the next day was like, we're back to like it being bad. But I was like, for the first time I was like,
Yeah. I think, that was, I actually had a very similar experience. It was, so what happened initially for me was that I kind of started to get exposed to some of Chris Damian's work and like his philosophical and like theological positions that still like affirm like the Catholic Church as like the true church or like the magisterial, like
the cool church,
whatever. Yeah, like it's still, he's
church.
Still like Chris Damian is still Catholic, but it's just like more progressive, specifically around like queer issues. And for me, like starting to get even just like mildly nuanced takes like that, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe there's a way that I can think about this just slightly differently. And I think that's like, that's important. Like, I think that those kinds of platforms are important. Because it's very hard to go from just like one thing to the other. And it's honestly like not even psychologically healthy to just like swing like your entire belief system, like crumble overnight. Like you can't, it's like a death is like how I would describe it. Like the process of like grieving and like having to move through like the world. I think they say something like that in the Handmaid's Tale book, actually, too. They like talk about like if you've never had a faith, you won't understand what it's like, but it's like grieving like the death of a friend.
I think maybe an intro to this entire topic is that deconstruction isn't synonymous with demolition.
Yeah.
Where what deconstruction means isn't that you end up being a rabid atheist who wants to burn down the church.
Right.
What deconstruction is to first figure out what are all of the beliefs that I hold, both implicitly and explicitly, and then examining what they are, what are the effects in your life, do I have good reason to believe this, and then figuring out, do I keep this one on the bookshelf, or do I put this one away? And so I think deconstruction starts even before somebody formally leaves the church, and many people have deconstructed but are still in the church because they like the community. And so when you're starting to examine the first rock that you're like, let's flip it over and look at it. You don't have to throw all of the other rocks away.
No, it doesn't have to be this thing. And I think like the reason why deconstruction for a lot of queer people leads to exiting the church is because the church is the one sitting there saying that this is very black and white, and you have to choose. There's no space for you to be in the in between. And so we're like, okay, like then I'll go. But a lot of people who aren't queer, and even some people who are able to go through this process of deconstruction and just like start to see the world through a more nuanced, more realistic lens, and still like hold on to their faith community. And I am still like, I wouldn't really consider myself an atheist. I'm somewhere kind of like agnostic, kind of spiritual-ish. But yeah, you don't have to, it doesn't mean that like everything you've ever thought is going to be thrown away.
And I think you're coming to the end of a fundamentalist view when you start catching yourself daydreaming a lot of what would life look like outside of it. Or I remember I would think like many years down the road, I'd be like, what would life be like? And you start recognizing that you're thinking about leaving. You're like, and if I were to leave, I'd probably do it this way. If I were to leave, I'd probably do this. Yeah. Or maybe things would look like this, or maybe my life could look like that. You start thinking about different things, and that's probably a sign that you should be honest with yourself first, that you are wanting and thinking and looking at what a more nuanced view of life would look like, apart from just a dogmatic view of everything. Yeah,
I think definitely like starting to find those more nuanced views. I think also just like starting to have, I think it's easier to start to have compassion for, or at least for me, it was easier for me to start to have compassion for other people's journeys being different before I was able to accept like my journey being different from what I thought it was going to be. So like I had a very close friend from high school who had come out and was like dating her girlfriend. And I was just like, she's happy. I'm happy for her. That's really weird. Like I'm not supposed to be, but I am. Like, and that was something I would always talk about, like wrestling with, is just like, she looks happy. Like, and it's very, I think it can be, that can start to cause like friction when you see that, like, because testimony is such a deep piece of what keeps you insulated in these communities, is that like you're actually sitting there over and over again having it told to you. Like that's the entire format of a testimony, is like, my life was bad and then I did what the church said and now my life is good. And like I did not have a concept at the time. Like I loved testimonies. Like it's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like we're hearing about the work of the Lord, but they are set up in a very specific way where it's not nuanced. It's just like life outside the church, horrible. Life in the church, good. Or even though life in the church can sometimes be hard, like it's still so much better than being outside the church. And when you're just having that like repeated to you all the time, like you really start to internalize it, that the outside world is like a scary, scary place. And so when you start to like see the stories of people who that's just not their reality, it can kind of make something in your brain go like, oh, maybe it's not so bad.
And I think people into the next stage from just imagining a life, or maybe not admitting doubts, to start actually looking at paths. And I think inside of religion, you spend the whole time, there's only two paths. There is fully in our group, and then there's the most absurd caricature of what it means to not be out there. And to your point on being able to empathize with other people, you realize there's a lot of paths here. I can be Catholic and go to mass and be in a relationship. I can go to another Christian church. I can go to a different religion. I can not be part of a formal religion, but have this form of spirituality. I can leave altogether. And then even within those, they're all so different. And I think so much of religion, the nuance of the world gets pancaked and steamrolled into either you're in the church, your life is perfect, or you're miserable, doing drugs on the street, having sex with 8 million people a day, hating everybody and angry and depressed. And those are the only two. And then you start realizing like, oh, I know people who've left and their lives aren't like that. And I know a lot of people who are part of different religions and have the same benefits that we do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we were literally just chatting about right before we started recording this is that I used to work in like a pro-life organization, like door knocking and talking about like pro-life issues in elections, which, as you can imagine, is not always super pleasant work when you encounter people who disagree. And I I think it's like a tactic that the Mormons use too with their missionaries. Honestly, it's like more to keep the missionaries in the church just because everyone's so horrible.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what, like, one thing that was like a really like confusing thing to me was when people would be pro-choice, like really pro-choice, but also just like very kind and compassionate, and they'd be like, do you want a water bottle? Like, I think you're completely wrong and I disagree with you for X, Y, and Z, but I'm gonna say it nicely. I'm gonna offer you like a granola bar and a water bottle, and I'm gonna send you on your way and say good luck.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh, like they're not mean, hateful, and horrible people just because they believe different things. Wow, that's kind of weird. And at one point in time, I nannied for a family who was like not in like the insular community, and they weren't going to church. And I was just like, oh, like they're happy and they are like good parents still. Really weird.
And so you go from kind of thinking about the outside world to investigating the outside world. And maybe the third step is you kind of start making plans, because if you're in a high control religious group, a lot of your life is tied up, whether you're in college or your social groups or your job or whatever it is. And if you're starting to have doubts, or even thinking about coming out, like the immediate answer isn't tell everybody in your life, even if it's unsafe. And so you kind of start that plan. And in my own work of helping a lot of priests leave the priesthood, is that it's not like, hey, I don't necessarily believe immediately drop and become homeless. You go, can I build a plan? Am I leaving in a month? Am I leaving in a year? Or am I just setting 3 months down the line, I want to be in a place where I can be honest with other people and then decide if I want to leave. So thinking about work, thinking about housing, thinking about, are you living with your parents? And you need to look at like, if they kick me out, can I move in with a friend? Or is there a shelter? Or whatever it is, you kind of have to start making the game plan. Even if you're not fully convinced you want to leave, start thinking about like, where could I be in a position where I could be honest or I could be open? And there's a lot of like practical steps there. Yeah,
that's, I think, like what the scariest part of it was to me, because I was just like, I didn't want to leave the church. Like that wasn't what I was fantasizing about. Like, at least not at first. Like, I didn't want to leave the church. I just wanted to like explore like being in a relationship as a queer person, like, but those things are mutually exclusive. It's like if I do try to explore like dating women, or if I do try to like, what does it feel like to not go to mass for one Sunday? Like that's not an option. Like there's no like in between. That's also synonymous with like losing social circles, with like not completing my education, with like, I was actually really scared I was going to lose my housing at one point in time when it like got out that I was in a relationship with a woman. I was like not totally sure that I was safe with like where I lived. And so those are unfortunately like the really scary parts of leaving the church.
And I think as you look at leaving, the first really important step is to find a good therapist.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
In therapy can be expensive, but in my case, I looked around for local nonprofits, and for people 20 and under, they offered 10 free sessions of counseling. Whether you're queer or not, or a person of color, like whatever it is, there's going to be a way to find therapy. There's leaving religion resources. And the reason you want to find that therapist isn't because they're going to deconvert you. You're not going to be talking to your therapist about the epistemology or biblical hermeneutics. You're not talking to your therapist about religion. What they're there to do is to think through and feel through this process, because to your earlier point, leaving religion is like leaving a really important relationship, because your sense of well-being, your health, your purpose, your meaning, your community, your housing, your value system, your entertainment, your friends, everything is wrapped up into this. And I think the first step is to sit and be okay with knowing that religion is important to you, and recognizing that it is, even if it's not true, it's important in your entire life.
I mean, that's such a thing. And I left the church in, I think it would have been October of 2022. I was studying abroad through Franciscan, So I was still like completely and utterly involved in that world. And like I came back and I was attempting to finish out my degree, living in that community.
Safe. Miles is like, I'm gonna die. You're good. You're good.
No, you're okay. We can edit. I was still living in that community. Like I was still attempting to maintain relationships, and there were like a lot of really complicated layers where, I mean, there were a lot of friendships that I lost like immediately upon coming out. Like they were just gone. They were done. But there were other ones that were much more nuanced. And when I'd kind of try to like process things that were hurtful happening within those relationships, people were like, why are you still friends with them? And it's just like, okay, well, actually, this was my whole entire world. It's not just as simple as like, oh, let me just cut off everyone I've ever known. And also like it's, I don't know. I think when people have takes like that, they're like maybe not coming from a situation where it like consumed them entirely. And like, I think another important piece to recognize is, and I definitely think this is very prevalent in the charismatic world. Maybe it has its own version in traditionalism, but like there was a very strategic breaking down of identity. Like there was a very strategic way in which we like were continually renouncing any and all identities that were not deeply tied into the church. And so that's like where being in therapy, I think, is so important, because it does feel like such a devastating loss when you've been programmed since you were 12 to like completely deconstruct your identity as a human person. And then like when you start trying to leave the church, you just like, you don't even know who you are outside of the church because you've completely stripped away everything else about yourself as a person.
And I think you have to recognize, and like we said with deconstruction, is to first realize things and then to reevaluate. And so when you start to that point, you realize, oh, my identity is swept up into this, the story about my life, the family members that I have, or the stories that I tell about them, or my career, or how I envision my entire life has been one way. Then now I'm starting from scratch. As that first step is to recognize, and then the second step is then to reevaluate. And I think we were talking about this beforehand. I was telling people in the deconstruction process is like in Indiana Jones, where he's got the golden idol and he has the bag of sand to kind of replace so that the same weight stays on the scale. Now, he doesn't do it successfully in the movie.
He tried.
But the point being, you have to go, oh, one of the things that I love about religion is having a great place to gather on the weekends. Is there an alternative?
That's when I really like, I took that full send. Veronica and I started, well, I didn't live with Veronica at this point, actually. I was living with a different friend who had left the church in our campus apartment, plus one other girl who was still really religious. And, but when the one other girl who was still really religious would go to mass, we'd hold secret gay underground brunch on Sunday.
Sounds awesome, by the way.
Which was incredible. And we would like gather the other secret gay underground people at Franciscan, and like, it was really nice to have that like
support network.
That support, and just like that kind of replacement almost of like gathering with people who have shared experiences on Sunday and like breaking bread. And like that's not something I have in my life anymore, but I think that was like a really important, you can't just throw everything out and then leave yourself as like this empty void
of a person. Because I think a lot of times you hear, oh, if you leave religion, you're going to have a God-shaped hole in your heart. But then you start realizing the only reason that hole is there is because they had a cookie cutter that they cut out that part of your heart with. And so you go, and like we talked about finding your support network, is it a therapist, number one priority, but then what friends can I talk to honestly about my journey? What family members can I talk to? Is there, if things go absolutely terribly, can I fly to another state and crash at somebody's couch for a few weeks? You have to plan for the worst, but hope for the best. And there are some people in my own deconstruction that surprised me that are still in my life. And there's some people that I thought were going to be okay and did the complete opposite. And so if you can figure out your support network as you navigate through, it's going to be super helpful. So recognize what religion's doing to you or doing for you.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of navigate that end. And so moving to the next step is actually, especially being queer, like I remember planning ahead of time when my last mass was ever.
Yeah.
And I knew a week or two, and for some people it's months or a year beforehand when they know when the end's coming.
Yeah.
And to be able to enjoy it, to go one last time, to remember it, and then you kind of go, I've closed the book on this chapter in my life and it's time to move on. But to make it an end that's going to give you peace and not go out in some big way and not just kind of peter off. I remember for me it was important to just go one last time.
Yeah.
And I remember that, and that's the last time I've been, and that was impactful.
Yeah. I did not have that clean of a break off, but that probably would have been healthier. I just had like this really weird, I was already mentally kind of leaving, but then every time I'd try to like not go to confession this week, not go to mass this week, it would just like eat at me for a while. And that was just like, it's hard when you've been conditioned that like that's like the prompting of the Holy Spirit. Like I know someone from Franciscan is like watching this video right now, and they're like, the Spirit tried to reach out to her and tell her what she was doing was wrong. But it's like, okay, or it was like, you know, maybe symptoms of religious OCD to some degree, and like layers of religious trauma and messaging and programming. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have as clean of a break. I kind of like, I had a bit of a back and forth kind of tug going on where I'd like try and then it didn't, just like, I was just like, no, I gotta go. But it started to become clear. It's like, why am I here? I'm here out of like this sense of obligation, and I'm here out of this fear of hell, honestly, at this point. Like, fear of hell isn't, I didn't like scare myself into religion, but then it's like, that's what's holding you there at the end. And I mean, I was still going to like classes at Franciscan and stuff, and we're like going through like the whole Summa, and I'm just like, okay, like, thanks Aquinas, like my heart's not in this, like I'm doing this for all of the wrong reasons, and I don't even actually believe this, and my conscience doesn't even actually believe this. And so why am I doing this? Like, it came to this point where it was just like, okay, I guess like the church teaches that kind of I'm going to hell either way at this point, because I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. Like, I'm not doing this for the right reasons per the church anymore. So it's just like, what am I suffering like this for at this point anyway? So I do think like it's okay if it takes some like back and forth. And if like the first time you try to like stop doing something, you like feel guilt and shame, because that's very deeply programmed into you at this
Even
point.
from a secular response, we would expect that to happen. And I think religious people are like, oh, people having regrets, that's a sign that God's voicing. Like, no, we would expect that. And I remember especially at the end and right after I was leaving, I kind of call it like Pascal's gay wager, which is either I spend the rest of my life in the closet following church teaching, living a miserable life, and I die and there's nothing there, or I take a few years to figure out life, to figure out what I value, and live life, and I can come back at any point in the future. And so in a reverse way, especially in a more fundamentalist sect where religion isn't just something you show up on Sunday, but like consumes your whole life, in a certain way, I was like, I would rather try living a life that's authentic, that I care about, that I love, and find peace in, and regret it than having never tried that. And I think a lot of people experience that once they come out is when their life finally starts, because they get to be honest, they get to find people that know who they are, they get to fall in love with people that they care about, they get to make mistakes, and they get to have awesome moments, they get to have sad moments, but they get to do it in a not fake, convoluted, dishonest type of way. They get to just live life as it is, which is amazing and tragic and sad and beautiful and all these things at once.
It is. And that's the thing, is like, I think the church in a lot of ways likes to pretend like if you just do everything perfectly,
Yeah.
Like, well, on some level, they like to pretend like if you do everything perfectly, it'll eliminate human suffering.
Yes.
And then on some level, when you point that out, they're like, we never promised it would eliminate human suffering.
We had 5 asterisks next to the big sale.
But yeah, I think one thing for me that was really, really hard when I was kind of getting to this point was like the testimonies of other people in my life who had lived the gay lifestyle and then come back to the church. And I was just like, okay, like they've been there, done that. And they were like, it was miserable.
Yes.
But then like, I kind of just started to think more critically about it over time. And I was like, okay, like actually it is going to suck. Like it is going to probably kind of suck right away when I like lose everyone in my life. Like it is probably gonna kind of suck for a moment when like I have to like work on cult deprogramming.
Yes.
Like that's not gonna be a super initially pleasant experience, but that doesn't mean that I'm like doing something wrong or that like this is like the punishment of like the spirit leaving me. Like that just means like I'm learning how to authentically just like exist in the world, and it's not sunshine and rainbows, and I can't anymore like attribute things that are going wrong to like Satan and like everything that's going well to like the spirit. So I don't want to like paint it in some kind of way where it's like, oh, immediately everything is so perfect, because like to different degrees, depending especially on how like entrenched you are within a community, it is actually probably going to like be really hard. But I think by the time you get there, like by the time you get to this point that you're already questioning, like it's already really hard. Like it's already that hard. It doesn't get harder to like flip to the side where you're questioning and out of the church. Like it's already gotten very difficult by the time you get to that point.
And I think as you're leaving, all of a sudden you have all of these mental muscles that have atrophied over time. Like, what decisions do I want to make? When you're in religion, you don't have to use that muscle because you have the rules and the documents, and then you have spiritual advisors and people in your life to tell you what to do. Or thinking about complex moral questions out there in life, you go to the catechism or you go to your local priest and you get the answer. Or figuring out how do I want to do something as simple as use social media? Do I use all of it? Do I not use all of it? Do I spend a few hours a day? What sort of content do I watch? Like all these things, I think people from the outside world don't understand how much you filter everything in your life through this. And so when you leave, we expect it to go, wait, I've never used this muscle before, which is making decisions for myself. And it takes time. And I tell people, after you leave religion, one of the things I'm most proud of is having grown that muscle to make empathetic and helpful decisions for myself and for the world. And it takes a while when you don't have the religion out there and you're like, wait, so what is it that I want? And then, and especially in a religious context, you have this preconceived notion of how your teenage years, and then your college years, and then your young adult years, and then your early married years, and then your having kids years, and then your grandkids years. You have this cultural zeitgeist and this plan out there for your life. And so when you leave, it's like, wait, do I want kids? Do I want a relationship? Do I want this career? Do I want to do this? And it takes time to grow those muscles. And so when you first leave, some people report sunshine and rainbows, but right after you're kind of like, wait, I compare it to like running, where it takes a while to get used to the trails. Like you have to build the muscles, you have to build the cardio. And in the same way, you have to do that when you leave religion and make decisions for yourself.
And I think in a lot of ways it can be very comforting, especially if you've like grown up with a lot of chaos, whether that's like in your family or like externally, like I don't know. But if you've grown up with a lot of chaos, I think like fundamentalism in a lot of ways can be a trauma response. Was for me. And so the idea of like going back into a world where you don't have all the answers for everything and you don't have a path just laid out for you, like that can seem really scary. But it honestly, you just can take it at your own pace at that point. Like there were a lot of things kind of like you were saying, like that I was like, wow, like I didn't realize that I've never even thought about this. Like do I want to present myself like the way I present myself to the world? Like, this is such like a classic moment, but I had like my mask lesbian face, and I was like, yeah, no, not me. Don't look like that. I like, that's just not how I present myself to the world. And then like Katie and I had been dating for like almost a year by the time I left Franciscan. And I was like, oh my God, like we've been together for like a year. Like we need to be engaged. And then I was like, wait a minute. Do we? Like, that's not our timeline. And then I'd always wanted to be like pregnant by like 22. And I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I don't have a child right now. Like, I'm excited to have a kid one day, but like, that's just not my timeline. And I always thought those were things I wanted, but I really just wanted to follow like the path that had been laid out for me and like do it really well. Yeah. And so it's actually great to be able to have free will.
And even on when people leave religion, they think that if I leave, I'm going to fall prey to every temptation of the world. Yeah. And I remember after leaving, like I've never drank and I've never done drugs, and then I left, and then I was like, wait, I could, and then I was like, I don't want to, not because God didn't tell me to, but because I don't think it's a good decision. Some people make other decisions, but then that's an example of like, oh, I don't just go, what does the book say? I go like, how do I want to live my life? And my answer was like, not doing those things.
Yeah. And some people, like, people just have very different ways they live their life. Like, one of my very close friends from Franciscan who then left the church, not Veronica, I'm not talking about Veronica, but one of my very close friends from Franciscan who then left the church, like, went in such a very different direction from me. Like, it's very like classic, like Veronica and I call it like party hookup culture. Yeah. Like, bleached her eyebrows, like dated a billion people, like hooked up with a billion people, like tried out weed. And it's like, that was her journey. And for me, like, I don't drink and I don't really want to drink. I don't do drugs and I don't really want to do drugs. I accidentally saved myself for marriage because the only person I've ever been with is my partner of 2 years now. Like, people have very different journeys outside the church. And I think there is like there's a narrative that like, there's just like all this suffering, and I'm just like, okay, like, my girlfriend and I like watch a movie on a Friday night at home with our adopted doodle, our thrifted doodle.
Crazy hedonistic right here.
I know.
Watching movies with a cute dog, unacceptable. And like, after you leave religion, I also think to decide on how long are you going to give it before you consider going back. Same thing like leaving a relationship. You go, we're not going to talk for this period of time. And with religion, can you go, for me, I was like, I just want to try a year outside and see what it was like. And not that in my head, I was like, and I can never go back if I want to, but I was like, I'm going to do a year on my own. And that was helpful to just go, oh, so the challenges that I'm having now since leaving, I can work through them. I can think through them. I can learn through them. And then maybe I can go back instead of, oh, it's Sunday, my brain's yelling at me, oh, how do we do Sunday mornings without like planning mass times? And the answer is like, in Denver, go hiking with my family, go on camping trips with my friend, sleep in after a hard week of work, go out to breakfast with people from work. Like, there's so many things that you can do. And if you can set, hey, I'm going to do a month or 3 months or a year, and every challenge that you're facing, think through it, because there isn't easy answers out there. It's not like, and I think people think that atheism is this positive worldview and that we have our own moral code out there. And the answer is like, no, there's so many shades of belief or not belief. It's not even atheism or Christianity. There's so many different stopping points and so many different worldviews. And atheists don't have a book for doing things. It's just, there's a bunch of other systems out there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of directions your life can take. And I think the thing is too, is within Christianity, I think Catholicism specifically, there is a very strong narrative that like, you are a horrible, broken person who can't do this on your own. But like, it's just like, no, like, honey, you're not a bad person. Like you actually are capable of making moral decisions without like the looming threat of eternal punishment. And like it's gonna be okay, and you might make some mistakes and you might try on some things and say this doesn't fit me. And that's also just like being in your 20s. Like if that's when you're leaving the church. But I think it tends to be like when a lot of people go through a deconstruction. And people who deconstruct later, I think also like kind of talk about having like a second adolescence. But yeah, you can just like try on different things, and if they're not for you, they're not for you. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And you can just like have empathy with yourself. That's one thing I say now all the time is like, I still have like a sense of like right and wrong. Like if I'm like being like mean to someone and then I'm just like, wow, like what the fuck was that, Evelyn? Like be nice. Like I just don't think like Satan was attacking me anymore. And I don't think that like I like made that decision because I didn't like pray and fast.
You get to make decisions out of goodness and wanting a better world rather than this thought of like, wait, what type of sin is this? And is this a moral sin? Is this a grave sin? You just get to go, hey, I want to be a good person. I want to be nice to people. I want to live in a world. And it's like, oh, you realize you can make positive decisions for positive reasons. I'm
not like going down this checklist of like the Marian virtues and being like, okay, how can I practice blind obedience today? How can I practice ardent charity? Like I'm just like sitting there and I'm like, oh, my friend's having a hard time right now. Like I'm going to go do this thing and help her. Like, and no deity needed to, is it deity? One of those words that I know how to read but not say. But no like divine being needs to tell me that I need to do that. I just like, I love when I like out Christian the Christians and it's like not even on purpose, but it's just like, oh wait, like it's exactly what I was saying before about Aquinas, about how like everything has to be done for like the right reasons. And it's actually so much easier to do that when you don't have like looming like threats and rewards hanging over your head, because I'm not doing any of this like to receive a reward or to avoid a punishment. I'm just doing it because I want to do it. And I'm still making good choices.
And without the shame involved in it. And then as you leave, I think the next big thing is to find the thing to get you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Which is that meaning, that purpose, the thing that gets you out of bed. And for a long time, I remember I would get out of bed because I have to go right to my daily offering and to go right into pulling out the breviary.
Yeah.
And then when I was leaving, it's like, what is it that I want to wake up for? And for me, 2 months after I left, I was getting into ultra marathoning, which kind of has that transcendent purpose. There's a great community around it. There's this deep why. You're pushing yourself, you're growing, you're out there in the beautiful nature. And so for me, it was kind of like, once again, that Indiana Jones, like, how can I replace what I loved about religion, which is community, which was a common direction, which was getting to nerd out on these niche topics, and found it in another group. Some people, they find that get out of the bed thing in the morning for their family or for their dogs or for volunteering or for their career or for a hobby. There's so many things. And to your point, if you can just try things out, go on something like Meetup, which just has a bunch of local groups around hobbies. Can you join sports teams? Whatever hobbies you have, are there groups that do it? And try out new things, and then you'll kind of go, oh, I like this hobby and I like this career, and actually these friends are great to be around. And these friends, even though I met them after leaving the church, I don't like being around them. I'm going to have a different set of friends. You get to start designing your life and having that orientation of where you want to be going.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean I think I'm like the god over my own life or anything like that. It just means that like I think I'm a person with free will. Like it's not any kind of like scary, prideful thing it's been made out to be. Also, I mean, I guess like maybe this is I still have that like Catholic apologist that sits on my shoulder being like, the people who are Catholic watching this are going to say this. But like, yeah, I guess it's just like, it's just not that deep. I think that's like the biggest takeaway that I've had from leaving the church is that most things are just not that deep. Like, sure, yeah, like don't like murder people or whatever, like that's deep. But like most of our day-to-day choices are simply not that important. And it's like, okay, like you can just like do X, Y, and Z with your Sunday, and it doesn't have to have like intense cosmic significance.
And I think everybody picks things that are important to their lives,
Yeah.
and Catholics are designing their own life because they're deciding what parish do we want to go to, what
Yeah.
priests do we want to be around, what books do I want to read, what prayers do I want to have in my daily set of devotionals. In the same way, outside of religion, you go like, what do I want to do for my health? What food do I want to eat for dinner? Who do I want to hang out with? And I think the other thing, as you're trying to like start reconstructing your life, is that you don't have to have answers right away.
Yeah.
I remember after I was leaving, if somebody were to ask me what's the purpose of life, I wouldn't know. And now 2 years later, after having talked to a ton of people about that, now I finally feel answers. But it took 2 years plus all the other previous years of my life.
Yeah.
And I think the religious apologist approach to getting somebody to become religious is like, oh, you don't have perfect answers to the definition of like all of these big things. We have definitions. They're not good definitions.
Yeah.
And so when you're leaving, you have to, if somebody's like, define meaning, define purpose, define family, like define all these things, it's like, you can go, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm discovering that. Or they're like, so what's the reality of how pride plays into your decision making around the autonomy of your own life? You're like, I don't know, man. I'm just going out to dinner with friends here. Like,
Yeah.
it's not.
Most
not that
things
deep.
are not that deep. And 1 second, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get the thought. It's gone. The ADHD is kicking in.
Yes. In all of these things, they're both not that deep, but then I also find that they are very deep because you get to make those decisions. And I found, and this is a whole other rabbit hole on like the meaning of life stuff, that I found life became way more profound. And I became way more grateful for life and intentional about life and doing good things in life. And I realized this is all that I'm 100% confident that we have is this.
Yeah.
And so I don't turn into a hedonist. I become grateful for everything and live life to the max. And all of these like cliche things when you go, oh, I can't just go, we can just make up for it in heaven. Like there are real things and real problems and real joys in this side of whatever comes next. So let's love the life that we have and make a difference out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of times like religion can become, it's like I see ways it was supposed to be positive and then how it just went wrong. So it's like I used to work at a crisis unit with like clients in like substance abuse and mental health crisis. And a lot of times I saw religion as a really, really positive coping mechanism in their lives because they were going through this thing, like, especially with addiction, like that's something you're going to struggle with for like the rest of your life, most likely. Yeah. And like this concept that there is like an end point where like that suffering doesn't exist anymore and you won't struggle with this anymore. And like all of this like suffering has a purpose, like was a really like positive force for a lot of them. And yet somehow that's gotten flipped on its head in a way that negatively affects a lot of people, which is just like this concept that it doesn't matter if you're suffering. Like it changes it from like a way of coping with unavoidable suffering to like a way of imposing unnecessary suffering
Waiting
or justifying
your whole life.
Yeah, your life is not a waiting room. Like you're that's what makes me so sad when I hear people talk about that, like, oh, like our true happiness is not found here. And it's like, you can be happy on earth. Oh my goodness. Like it's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I found as I was leaving in the next few months, like I took a step away from even thinking about religion, from being around religious friends. And I think the thing that I was at that time thinking is that like goodbye now doesn't mean goodbye for forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now 2 years later, I talk to more people from when I was religious because I've had space to heal and think through these things and build my confidence. And now I can go back into those conversations without the thoughts swirling, without the guilt kicking in, without all of these big things. I'm like, I figured out who I am and I know what I'm here for and I'm good engaging. And same thing, I started making YouTube videos a year and a half-ish after leaving because I was like, oh, I can talk about this now.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to just take a step back and know that it doesn't mean you never have to look at religion again. I know a lot of people will leave, they'll become extreme atheists, and then they'll settle back on Buddhism or join another Christian sect or join a different type of religion. But you have to give yourself the space in the moment and be honest with what you're thinking through and go, I'm not up to this right now, and I'm okay with that. And 10 years down the line, who knows, I might be reading the Bible again from a secular standpoint or from a different religion. It's just like, give yourself some space now to not have answers, to think through things, and later on you might come back to them, but give your space.
Yeah, I think that's something that's so important. I also had the same thing of like when I was first leaving the church, I was like, I'm taking some time away from the church.
Yeah.
And I fully intended to like potentially come back. My really big thing actually was that I was like, am I bi or am I a lesbian? The world will never know unless I date a woman.
Yes.
And I was like, I was over here like trying to convince myself that I was bi so that I could still have like a life within the church that was like a real life, where I could still get married and still have kids and still have a family. But then I was like dating guys and I was like, I'm not so sure about this.
Yes.
And then I was like, okay, this is not just like impacting me. Like this is actually like, I'm not going to be like getting a divorce like 10 years and 5 kids down the line.
Yep.
Realizing this. So I need to figure this out for myself. So that was my kind of thing of like, I need to take some space from the church because I need to figure this out. But I mean, regardless of your reasons, like I think most people step away from the church with an idea of like, this could be temporary, this could be permanent. And like, I still view the world very much through like a lens of Catholicism. Like I think there's like a certain degree of that's like probably never going to go away because it was like my formative years of like how I view the world. And so even now when I like engage with spirituality, because I am like loosely kind of spiritual, like my brain kind of does perceive things through like a lot of Catholic frameworks, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think like, it's okay to let go of the messaging that everything has to be black and white and that like cafeteria Catholicism is like the worst thing you could possibly be or participate in. Like you can have just like varying degrees of engagement with religion in a much healthier way.
And you have to grieve and take the space because you're from birth or whenever you convert, you have these fantasies and these ideas of what life will look like, and then all of a sudden those are ripped away or you walk away from them. And even if you walked away with them, it's still okay to grieve over the fact that this idea of how you thought your life was going to play out went. Like I always wanted to be a priest, and that had so much meaning. And even after I left on my own volition, there's parts of me that was sad that life that I envisioned never happened.
Right.
And it's okay to grieve something, even when you decide to leave it.
Yeah.
And then you start rebuilding, how is it that I want to live life?
Yeah.
And maybe another side note that we can hit on here is talking to people as you're leaving. Kind of two things. One is be okay with knowing that they have to grieve too over their vision for yourself. I think the first thought from the secular perspective is like, that's terrible, that's the worst thing ever. But it's like you've had friends for years on end and you bonded over these things. And so it would be normal to expect them to be upset, not in some like manipulative way, but like, hey, we always thought we would have kids on the cul-de-sac and go to the same parish. So to give people space, but more importantly, to not let that space invade yours, because you don't have to give a reason to everybody of why you left. You don't have to have the perfect answers. You don't have to like adjudicate, hey, I want to step away from this. You don't have to explain. And though you can recognize somebody else's grief, it's not your responsibility to console them, to update them, to everything. You can both recognize, hey, I understand why this person is feeling this, and also realize, and those are their feelings, not mine.
Right.
And I can't engage this conversation right now. And now part of like what I do on YouTube and talking to people, like now I'm okay telling people why it is that I left and some of the reasons and the bigger thoughts. But in the moment, a lot of times when people ask those questions, it's to rope you back in, especially at your most vulnerable, when you're like, hey, there are challenges to leaving. And then they're like, see, there's challenges to leaving, come back. It's don't give that time of day. And so recognize, and also don't let that take over your life.
I think that was something that was one of the most like emotionally difficult things about leaving, was that there were some relationships that just like abruptly ended. And then there were some relationships that it took me a really long time to build trust in, because there is almost this like underlying narrative hanging in the air that
Yeah.
like their job is to bring you back. And so you almost don't like trust their intentions or trust their motives. And I like struggled with that for a really long time with like friendships I still have with people who are in the church. And like it's okay for like that to feel really hard. Like you
Yeah.
don't want to like literally just like feel suspicious of all your relationships with people. Like that feels difficult. But so yeah, if you just like need space, that's okay. You don't owe people an explanation when you're still figuring those
Yeah.
things out for yourself. And I do like what you said about like also appreciating that they're kind of grieving that too, because I think especially like if you leave the church, when you're in the church, it's so black and white. And when you leave the church, if you like deconvert, but you don't deconstruct, you can just go and apply those same like black and white principles to just like secularism.
Yeah.
And so I think like in the secular world of like being ex-religious, there can be almost this pressure to just like cut off everyone and like just have no empathy for their feelings. And it's like, okay, like, no, like this is actually hard. This is hard for both of us. And we're going to each like kind of hold our own grief. But also, yes, like their feelings about it, like their grief about it, that's not your responsibility. Like you can have empathy for it, but like that's not your job.
Yeah. And then what I found is either a few weeks or a few months down the line, then you realize like, hey, I had an awesome week this week.
Yeah.
Like I loved this week and I love the people I was with and I love the decisions that I made and I'm proud of myself and I'm at peace with myself and I love this life that I've built. And I think we've talked through the process of leaving is difficult.
Yeah.
But on the other side of flexing these muscles and growing these
Yeah.
muscles in your brain, I am proud of who I've become since leaving religion. That it's not like I left and haven't been a dynamic person and grown as a person. I have a stronger character. I have more empathy for people out there.
Yes.
I have more joy. I have more peace.
Yeah.
I love the belief systems that I've investigated and the ones that I've settled on. And I love the people that I have in my life. And if I could go back to when I was thinking about leaving and I could have painted the picture to my past self of what my life knows,
Yeah.
of what my life is like now, I would have taken it in a second.
Oh, yeah.
Like it might take a little bit of time, but then you were like, damn, this was a great weekend. And I got to be myself and go on a trip with people without worrying, are they going to figure out that I'm gay
Yeah.
or are they going to criticize me for not doing enough of that prayer? Or are they going to condemn a family member of mine because they don't believe the right things?
Yeah.
It's like, dang, I went on an awesome trip with people that I care about and I love. And I am excited that we went on that and I'm excited to do it again.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow.
This is
Wow.
great.
Yeah.
No, I love thinking about that. Like the part of scripture where it says you'll know the followers of Jesus by their fruits, and it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And those are all things that are definitely like profoundly more abundant in my life. So by your own metric, like I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing
Yeah.
by leaving.
And I think that leaving religion isn't a prescription or a positive view like these are the tenets to live by.
Right.
Leaving is kind of deconstructing, and like we said, deconstructing is to evaluate everything and figure out what you want to keep.
Yeah.
And leaving religion isn't what makes your life great, it's what allows your life to be great.
Yes.
Now you're on, it's the start, not the end goal. And so when people are like, oh, but like you don't have meaning in particle physics, the answer is like, yeah, no, we're not saying that. It's either dogmatic religion or worshiping the science experiment in test tubes. You start realizing like, oh wait, everything that I like is the starting position, and then I get to start growing and doing things and figuring things out and loving life and going through it and figuring out what am I here for? What do I find meaningful? What is meaning? What is purpose? What comes after this? That's just the starting line.
Yeah. No, it's just the beginning.
The starting line, you're not at the end, and it's an ongoing journey.
It is.
And then I think now 2 years down the line, looking back, you start rewriting the religious part of your life. Some people write it as it was the worst thing, it was the best thing. You get to start going like, it kind of feels like a fever dream and it's distant in a way, and you get to start thinking like, how is it that I want to view it? And I think that's why doing this podcast has been so helpful, because I get to think through it. It's like always doing therapy all the time. Like,
Yeah.
oh, now I'm remembering that, but I get to like rewrite that memory, but through a lens now. And I think most people tend to get to a point where they're grateful in some way for the religious journey. They can recognize the trauma and the bad things that happened, but religion made me who I am during that phase of my life and provided me memories and values in that part of my life. And I've kept some and I've left some. And so I look back with gratitude. Now, do I wish I could go back to my past self and give him a big hug and tell him, like, I know what you're going through right now is super tough and it'll be with you for the rest of your life, but I don't cut that out of my life. I haven't deleted every photo from those periods of time. I get to go, I went through that. And you get to non-judgmentally just look back and go, I made decisions that I thought were the best at the time. And now I'm doing the same thing now. And look where I am.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. It's not, I definitely have a very nuanced view that I did not have when I first left. Like I was very just, I feel like you do go through like all the stages of grief. Like I was like very angry, and then I was like romanticizing it. And then like you just kind of get to a much more stable place. And that doesn't mean like nothing's ever like triggering and makes you like angry at it again. But also, like, if you look at me and Cade and you're like, they left like 2-3 years ago and they're just like talking about it all the time, just know that for the average person who leaves the church, they are not still thinking about it as much as we do, because we do it professionally. It just, for a lot of people in my life, it's just like kind of just dissolved. Like they just leave religion, and then it's just like.
I was just talking where I'm staying here in LA. One of the guys, we were talking, and he figured out that I used to be Catholic, and then I was talking about it, and he was like unlocking these memories from long ago. And I know friends who are part of some of our same friend groups that come from the same background, and they're not as involved and don't stay up to date. And then from time to time, they'll remember when they did that dumb thing, or they remember when they had that awesome friend, or they remember that great part of religion, or that super traumatic memory. Most people don't end up making a podcast.
Right.
But still, it's, and I think talking to, there's kind of an older generation of ex-Catholics that have the stories of the crazy mean nuns when they were younger. And I was at this group, and there some of these older guys were talking about it, and you realize, like, it will always be part of your life. It'll always be part of your story, because it was a few chapters. It was one chapter, or maybe it was the first half of the book. It'll always be written into your book. But just because the first chapters happened one way doesn't mean like the rest of the chapters have to be a certain way. It's a lens through which you filter things. You have memories. You have these photos, and now it's fun talking about it, because I always think of my religious background like a party trick. When you're at a party and then somehow somebody talks about religion, and then you like throw a fun fact in there, and then people are like, wait, what's your background? And you get to like share it in a humorous way, and everybody's like, you did what? You were about to become a Catholic priest. It's like it becomes a fun part. And I always say that like things just are. Like you were religious. It doesn't have to be the best thing. It doesn't have to be the worst thing. It was.
It just was. Yeah.
It was.
I was a vegan also.
Yeah.
That happened. Now I'm not. It's okay.
And there's grief over those years that you felt like you wasted. But also one thing that has brought me peace over like I wish that I had never gone through it, but also I don't know what it would have looked like without it. Like we don't know what those years would have been like. And perhaps in the grand scheme of things, being religious saved me from certain things, or I learned something from it. Like you will always have lessons from those years, even if you felt like they were wasted. They were still years of your life that you learned things and did good things and did bad things and did helpful things and did terrible things. And they've shaped you into who you are today. And so whoever you are now, it can never be fully separated from who you once were.
Yeah, no, there's no, like, because people ask me that, I feel like kind of a lot, like, do you wish you hadn't? And it's just like, that is so deeply entangled into, like, not only my life then, but also my life now. Like, that's where I met some of my best friends. Like, that's where I met my partner. Like, those things are why my life is where it is now. So, no, like, I mean, on some level, it's like, I went through some really hard things in the church, and, like, that kind of sucked, but I wouldn't wish it away. It's just a part of what brought me to where I am now.
Because they say that like desire is a contract with yourself to be unhappy until you get something, and especially with grief around those years, there's no way to relive that.
Right.
There is no way you could go back. You
Yeah.
cannot scream loud enough for your past self to hear. And so you have to have this attitude of radical acceptance of like,
Yeah.
they were, and I fully believed, and these good things happened, and these bad things happened. And just because your part of your story now has been that, there is no limitations on the rest of your story because of that.
Right.
Like I don't know where my life's going to go, but in no way do I feel held back to now because of how I spent those lives.
Right.
And I've talked to couples and interviewed them that came out in their 50s and they still adopted kids at 55 and now their kids are off at college. I've talked to people who came out in their 70s or left in their 70s and they spent the last few years of their life with people that truly cared about them and got to pass away in the arms of their spouse. Like whether you're 12 or 20 or 50 or 80 coming out, there is at least tomorrow ahead of you.
Yeah.
And you can decide to have joy for tomorrow and live tomorrow the way that you are most proud of, regardless of how your story started or is currently going.
I love that so much.
Yeah, that's my parting words of wisdom. And like we said, find a good therapist.
Yes.
Through all of this. A secular therapist, they're not going to tell you what to believe. They're not going to debate theology. What they're going to do is to get you to live and inhabit your body, to be honest with the emotions that you're feeling, the grief, the joy, the excitement, the regret, and you get to build those muscles of thinking through and feeling through things without a dogmatic support system.
Yeah.
And get to be honest with where you are, because maybe you leave and the day after, some people talk about is like a weight lifted off of your chest.
Yeah.
For some people, it's a hard year that year after.
Yeah.
For some people, it goes up and down, and you get to just be honest. And I remember in the movie Love, Simon, after he comes out, one of the things that his mom says is that you finally get to breathe now. And I think in therapy, you get to be honest because you no longer have this incentive. When you're in religion, you have to like say that there's no bad things. But when you leave religion, you don't have to say it's all sunshine and rainbows. You can be honest with the therapist. Like, I really miss this ritual.
Yeah.
Because we're not positing in a belief system. It's just you get to be honest. You get to breathe. You get to think without this threat. And that's what a therapist there is to work you through. Yeah. And there's so many ways to find a free, solid therapist through local LGBT groups, through local leaving religion groups, through your local government, through a nonprofit, through whatever it is.
There's a lot of resources.
Almost always a way to get a few sessions. And therapy doesn't mean the rest of your life. You're going to be on a couch for an hour a week for the rest of your life. For me, it was 10 sessions. For some people, it's 3 sessions. Whatever it is, it's not going to always be there forever. And that's the goal of the therapist, is to get you out of their office. They're not there to, I think people in religion might have this view that therapists, they make money off of you, and so they want to keep you there. And it's just like, they have wait lists longer than you can imagine for months and years.
Most of the time,
And they want to have a good practice by getting you back on your feet.
Yes.
That's their goal.
They also have like ethical obligations around like not keeping you in therapy for like 7 years. Like there's like ethic boards that will like review the progress that you're making and things like that. It's really not their goal.
Yeah.
But also no shame if you are in therapy long term, because that's just some people's journey.
Yeah. And always my last words I always tell people is like, it does get better.
It does.
If I could tell, like I said, my past self how good life is now, it would have precipitated things a lot faster.
Yeah.
And in the darker moments of leaving, I was like, it will get better. We know that our bodies, no matter how hard we're grieving now, we know that grief is a process, and you move through the stages, and then you wake up one day and you're like, oh, life is pretty good.
Yeah.
And so it does get better. I think it's like, if you can remember one thing, is that life does get better.
Yeah.
Are my parting words. And I'll kick it to you for the last parting words or last tips or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think like kind of going back to what I was saying before about like testimony and how testimony almost like kind of held me captive in the church. When I like say that my life is better on the other side, I'm not trying to like testimony convince you to like leave the church. It's really more of a thing that just like, I know that everything and everyone around you is telling you that if you leave, it's going to be the worst thing ever. And I just want to let you know that's like maybe that was their story. Like maybe that was their journey, but that's not everyone's story, and that might not be your story, and you just get to make your own story. And like you just don't have to live by like what other people tell you your experience is going to be. Like just follow what your heart is telling you to do. If you're watching this podcast, if you made it to this point in it, I'm like willing to venture that you're probably not like deeply in the church, and like you're probably looking for someone to tell you that it's okay. And that's what we're here to do. We're not here to like convince you to leave. We're just here to tell you that like if you're watching this, you're probably thinking about it, and that's okay.
Yeah. We don't, sitting on this couch, have a vested interest in the intricacies of your theology or philosophy surrounding Platonism. Like, whether you stay Catholic or reconstruct or join a different religion or leave altogether, I don't feel an impetus. We just want you to enjoy life and love life. Like, in whatever
that's our
form
angle.
takes.
That's our agenda. That's the gay agenda.
Yeah, the gay agenda is to have joy.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of the podcast. Like we said, find a therapist, but if you're wanting an online group to talk through these things in a non-psychological or therapeutic way, I'd encourage you to join our Discord, or you can send us, you can send me an email directly if you have personal questions. But yeah, that Discord server I found to be a great resource, as well as we have a whole other podcast here today. Tell people a little bit about what you guys are up to and where they can find and watch more of you guys.
Yeah, so we have our podcast, Leave, Laugh, Love. We're on all podcast streaming platforms, so you should be able to find us. We also have an Instagram at Leave, Laugh, Love, where we post like question boxes and things sometimes. So if you want to get involved like that, feel free to check that out. And then I am The Life of Ev on TikTok, and I talk a lot about my own like personal journey with deconstruction and like life after religion there. Yeah. So yeah, come and listen to our pod.
And if you want to make all of this possible, this is made possible through everyone on Patreon. We're currently in LA, flew out here for a different event and got to talk to Evelyn here today, who I gave the wrong address on the way here, but
he sent me all over LA.
Yeah, and LA traffic is terrible, so I must atone for that, I guess. But Patreon makes all of this possible, so consider supporting there, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Bye.